This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to talk this morning to Dame Professor Heather McGregor, the Provost and Vice President of Heriot-Watt University in Dubai. Heather, I ask people to bring an object that represents their journey, their life's journey, but also their professional journey. And you don't necessarily have to show it, so you can describe it to us. And then I've got a number of questions that I'd like to talk to you about and anything else that comes up, because this is a conversation.
Right, well, I can show you a picture of me in this because what I wanted to bring you to show you is my academic gown. Actually, I now have two academic gowns because I have the academic gown I got for getting my doctorate, which is the one I have brought to show you. But I do actually have another academic gown now because once you get in a university to a position of very senior leadership, you get a university issued gown for the level you are at. So I have a provost gown as well.
I had a provost gown too.
All right. What colour was your provost gown? These things are very important to us women.
Black with silver.
Ah, that's quite grown up actually. Mine is purple. I'm not with yellow detail. My provost gown, I'm not absolutely convinced of it. As you can see, and I will share a photo with you as well, that my academic gown is from the University of Hong Kong, which is where I did my PhD, and it is a blue with a sort of dark red hood and dark red trimmings. And this gown represents everything to me because it shows you the journey of my career and my leadership. And I was devastated when I came to here to Dubai to become a provost and realized I was never going to wear it again and that I had to show up in this purple thing all the time.
So tell me your story, because when I read that you had a PhD from the University of Hong Kong, I thought there's a story there. How did you get to doing a PhD at the University of Hong Kong?
So my life has been one long aspirational journey because I've always aspired to things which I haven't necessarily been able to do immediately. So when I did my undergraduate degree at Newcastle University in the north of England in agricultural economics and marketing, and then I went and had a career. Actually, I had a brief moment of academia because I got a reasonably good degree and I was invited on a scholarship to the University of Bradford to do a PhD. And so I had a first go at a PhD, a starter PhD. And I really, the whole PhD horrified me. The most thing that horrified me about it was living on £50 a week, which at the time was a EPSRC grant for PhD students. And within a year, I had quit and I had gone to London to a job in advertising. And I worked in advertising and communications for 5 years. And in that time, I went to work for an Australian company, and and I did most in that 5 years. Most of those 5 years were for this Australian company, which I worked for them a little bit of time in Australia, but then most of the time in the UK because they relocated to the UK. And in that time, I realized what I was mostly interested in was the financial markets, and I wanted to move into the financial markets. And my passport to doing that was an MBA. So education was my passport at every point of my career to the next thing. So I got an MBA. I quit this Australian company and became an investment banker, and then I worked all over the world. In my MBA is from the London Business School. I worked all over the world for this investment bank in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Japan, and I was following my husband who was on Planet Murdoch. So he was working for Star TV, which Rupert Murdoch had acquired back in 1983. And 1993, Rupert Murdoch acquired Star TV in 93. And my husband then went to Hong Kong to work for Star TV and then all these other countries in Asia. And I just constantly asked the bank to move me to follow my husband everywhere. And it was in that time I had my second baby. And I remember not having any time to have any maternity leave. I was an investment banker, and at the time that the baby was born, I was living in Hong Kong. And I had no time at all to have any maternity leave. So I just carried on working. I remember I was working on the listing of an Indian company. And so we were busy getting it through its IPO. And after about 3 months, when the baby was 3 or 4 months old, I suddenly thought, my goodness, I need to spend some time with this baby. And I took a protracted holiday and we went to Australia. And I remember sitting in a swimming pool, of all places in Adelaide, with this 3-month-old baby that I barely knew, and thinking, I can't do this forever. I need to move into a full-time role in education. At the time, I was 32 years old. I was about to be 33, and I thought, how could I achieve that? How could I achieve a career in education? And I thought, I need to do a PhD. And I went back to Hong Kong, and while working still as an investment banker, I went and enrolled at the University of Hong Kong in the business school there. And I then embarked on a PhD journey that took 7 years and involved 2 extensions. I was at the limit of the Hong Kong University approvals process for extensions. And during that time, I had a third baby. And I just thought, don't try this at home. Whenever I tell people about this, I say, don't try this at home. It's not any fun. 3 children, a PhD, a full-time job. It's just not any fun. And in fact, I recognized that I wouldn't even finish if I didn't quit the bank. And so I quit the bank in the year 2000 and bought a company so that I could be my own boss. And then I could do my academic research in my own time and under my own steam. And then I finished my PhD. And this is the story of this gown, because on the day when I was meant to graduate from my PhD, the graduation was obviously in Hong Kong. And by this point, I was living back in London. And I thought, it's going to cost about £700 for the plane ticket alone. And I don't know that that's a good use of my money. At this point in my career, when I was running a business and I had all these people depending on me and everything else, and the business really needed me to focus on it, and I just didn't think it was the right time. This is the end of 2003. Plus, by the way, we'd had SARS, which for those people listening is a bird flu scare. That this is in 2003, and so I had done my viva with 3 men with masks on. And in Hong Kong, where we had to speak to each other through masks, so it wasn't an easy process. And I didn't want to go back again after my viva and graduate. But then at the very bottom of the form that they sent me, it said, if you want to, you can buy your academic gown instead of renting it, and it will be £700. And I thought, that's a better use of £700. I will buy my academic gown. And I thought, well, when would I use it? I will never use it unless I have a career in academia, but I aspire to a career in education one day. So let me buy it, let me hang it in my wardrobe. And every day when I went to my wardrobe to get dressed, there it was. And from the age of by this point, I'm 40, so I'm 41 or something. So from the age of 41 until the age of 54, so 13 years, it never came out of its Eden Ravenscroft bag. And I saw it in my wardrobe every day. And then one day I got to go to Heriot-Watt University. And my very first time of opening that bag, other than to check that the thing was in there in the first place, was to take it out and wear it at my first graduation ceremony for Heriot-Watt University in November of 2016. And I have never been happier. But that gown was for me a sign that I had worked towards my career and my aspiration to a career in education.
So given this extraordinary career that you've had, you've had several careers really, and particularly the global perspective that you've got, and now that you're working in Dubai, how do you understand the world, and how do you understand higher education? because you're looking at it through multiple lenses. You're looking at it through the academic lens, the locational lens, the context lens, your discipline lens, and then there's the sort of geopolitical place of where you're living.
Yes, and obviously, you know, I have, and I also am looking at it through a parental lens. So I have three children who are all British and Australian citizens, of course, and they have studied for their undergraduate degrees on three different continents. So my oldest son graduated from the University of Sussex. My second son, after a starter go at Imperial College, decided that he'd rather be at the University of Melbourne and relocated himself to Australia and did his degree at the University of Melbourne. And my youngest son is at Oregon State University on the west coast of the United States. And to me, also, the lens that I have seen these three very different higher education systems through includes these three extra perspectives of being a parent. So I definitely see the world very globally. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to work at Heriot-Watt, because I see that what we are doing and our responsibility is as educators is obviously we're all into the business of the creation and dissemination of knowledge. And I am still research active. I still teach, despite running an enormous campus with 5,000 students on it and so on. I still do all of those things. I still supervise, and I have 5 PhD students. And I make the 168 hours that we all have in the week go. Every minute counts, you know. But I do see things through multiple lenses, and I do think that the world is a global place, and particularly for educators, because ultimately we are all on Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is to provide education for all. And some of the things that I have been personally involved in championing, I am my proudest of, and I didn't even start this career till the age of 54. So what I would say to every postmenopausal woman out there, you know, look, you can do it. If you actually look at, I mean, and this is a terrible example, but it's a very relevant one. The incoming president of the United States has just appointed his education secretary, and she is 76. So I feel that there's a whole extra world for people later on in life. And I have done the things I'm proudest of since joining higher education. So my other lens I see it through is the lens of opportunity. And in fact, when I got my damehood, I got it for services to education and for things I have done since becoming a full-time educator. So that was, you know, for me, it has been an amazing time of my life.
Did you expect to have this career ahead of you when you were an undergraduate student at Bradford?
No, well, I was an undergraduate student at Newcastle, but I went to Bradford to try and get a career in education, and then realized very quickly I didn't want it. But, you know, I have also learned that actually just the first time you try something may not be the deciding factor for you. And I'll give you 3 examples of that. So as you heard, I didn't continue with my first PhD, but I went back later and did one. When I was first living in Australia in my 20s, I tried learning to fly an aeroplane in Perth, WA. There isn't a more perfect place from a weather point of view, by the way, to learn to fly an aeroplane. And I absolutely hated that lesson. And yet, many, many years later, when I was 46, I went back and learned to fly an aeroplane and got my pilot's license, which I still have. So I just because you don't succeed at something or don't fit with something straight away. I also, when I was 25, realized I should have qualified as an accountant and bitterly regretted it. And then said I would start doing it when I was 50. And when I was 50, I did enroll in the Chartered Institute and started studying, and then realized I didn't have time for that. And I went back to it at 58, and I qualified finally as a chartered management accountant 3 weeks before my 60th birthday. So what I would say is that I have learned that if you don't do something the first time, it doesn't mean it won't happen. But I never thought I would end up as a provost. I aspired to a career in education, but to be honest, Judyth, what I thought I would be doing right now is my dream job, which is to be, and if anyone out there's listening, this is my dream job. Okay, I would like to be an adjunct in the business or accounting department of the University of the Sunshine Coast. That would be, or the University of the Gold Coast. These are the universities that I want to work with, universities that are not based in cities and that where helping people get great jobs afterwards is their stock in trade. And that's more important to me than any number of citations.
Did you, in terms of moving from being a dean of a business school to being a provost, quite different skill sets and particularly two very different contexts. What are your insights about a white woman working in the Middle East in a senior executive role in a higher education institution?
Funny enough, that's the very question that Princess Anne asked me when she gave me my my damehood, when she pinned it on me. She said, "So, were you? How did you find it being sent as a white woman to the Middle East in an academic leadership position?" And interestingly, this is not a whatever people think about the Middle East. This is not a place where women are held back in any way. Well, first of all, I'm in the United Arab Emirates rather than in maybe other more conservative countries. The women here have had parity for a long time, and women leaders are all over the place. You know, government ministers, you name it, CEOs. My pro-chancellor is a billionaire and the chairman of one of the biggest industrial groups here, Dr. Raja Al Ghurg. And I haven't seen any barriers to being a woman or white. I am respectful of the culture. I cover up my shoulders and my arms, and I wear, especially if I go to more conservative parts of the UAE, like Abu Dhabi, where I was yesterday, and where the regulator is based, I would wear longer dresses and be, appropriately dressed. And I think you can be respectful without it being restrictive. But I tell you the really big difference from a cultural perspective. First of all, it's the dimensions of the international students. So we have campuses in both the UK and in Malaysia, as well as Dubai. And we teach the same thing with the same learning outcomes everywhere, and everybody can move around. And so the students can and do literally move from campus to campus. But there is a very different dimension too. So most of the students in Malaysia are Malaysian. Most of the students in the UK are, the largest body of students in the UK are from the UK. And of course, from Scotland, because we're in Edinburgh. Here I have 126 nationalities of student and 53 nationalities of staff. But the 53 nationalities of staff is quite normal. I think if you went to any university in Australia or the UK or Europe, that would be the case. But 126 nationalities of students, that is very unusual, but it's very normal for us here. And last year we had a Student of the Year competition that the Student Council ran here. And I defied anybody to guess the nationality of the student that won. I mean, literally none of my senior team could guess the nationality of the student that won. But I'll tell you, he came from Fiji. I really couldn't have ever predicted that I would be running an institution where we have 126 nationalities and the student that won the Student of the Year competition came from Fiji. But that's because this is the Gulf is such an international place, and particularly the UAE, because we have a population of 10 million, but only 1 million of those people are national passport carrying Emiratis, and the other 9 million people are all here on visas. Even if they've lived here for 3 generations, they will still be here on a visa. So that is the real difference. And the second cultural difference is that in this part of the world, people and 65% of my students here have grown up locally, but 35% have come from other countries. But whether they've grown up locally or they come from other countries, the tradition here is that your parents financially support your education, and there is no a HEX or these other or student loans or this kind of thing. There is no, unless you are an Emirati, there is no free education here at any level. And so the parents are very, very involved. And of course, as you know, in a university, you can't deal with the parents unless the students sign something to say that you can deal with the parents, but the parents come to all the open days. The parents turn up at my door the whole time. If the parents have a complaint, they're here. You know, the parent is paying. Quite often, if the parent doesn't pay and you have to shut down the student's access to the systems, that is terrible. You know, you feel dreadful, but it's the only option if because you can't have a situation where people don't pay because I can't pay my salaries. See, these are the kind of the cultural things, because in the UK, I wouldn't see a parent. I wouldn't, and the time I would see a parent would be at graduation. That would be the only time I would ever encounter a parent. And secondly, I would be dealing with a relatively small, even amongst the international students, a relatively small number of nationalities. So those are the differences here.
You're a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy. The second person who was awarded that honour at Heriot-Watt.
I actually think I was the first person joint, actually, because we got it on the same day, and yes, no one had got their principal fellowship before us, and that was and there, you know, there are only 1,100 principal fellows in the world. In fact, I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh as well, and there are fewer principal fellows than there are members of the Royal Society of Edinburgh.
So, tell me about the basis for your being awarded that honour, and it really is an honour, and how you framed your approach to teaching, and how in these sort of leadership roles that you have now, you try to translate some of those core values and those core commitments to teaching that you were able to demonstrate.
So the principal fellow is very much about how do you influence others rather than what have you achieved yourself. And one of the and I should say that the work I did for my and the evidence I submitted for my principal fellow was actually all the stuff that was cited in my damehood as well. Interestingly, the main part of what I originally went to do at Heriot-Watt was that they had had a distance learning MBA for 30 years. And when I say distance learning, I really mean it. You know, you could be on an oil rig somewhere and you could still, it was completely delivered asynchronously. And it was a genius product of its time. You know, it was invented in the early 1990s. And you mailed out a book. I mean, it was like distance learning from, you know, I was homeschooled in Africa until I was 8. And that's what happened. You got mailed a pile of books and it was still like that. And then when it went online, this is before my time, actually all that went online was a PDF. So you had the book or you had a PDF online, but it was the same thing. And when I got there, my task was to completely revamp that. And we literally got rid of all the books and we rewrote interactive, entirely asynchronous. So you can still do it on an oil rig at 3 a.m. if that's when your shift finishes. A completely asynchronous degree, postgraduate degree, and then we replaced over time the books with this interactivity, and what we found was, of course, we made it fully downloadable. So even if you were not necessarily going to have access to the internet all the time, you could download it onto a tablet or download it in some way, download it onto a phone even, and you could study and do the quizzes and watch the videos and test yourself and everything while on the bus even. And that I got the university to fund that because and then we sent it out and that is what currently thousands of people are studying in 190 countries around the world. And then my greatest personal satisfaction with this, it came when I was able to get someone to fund me to put this into refugee camps so that we could reach people whose education had been disrupted by war and conflict. And originally, of course, when I was doing this 4 years ago, this was war and conflict in Syria, for instance, that had seen people displaced. Now, I think we're going to be dealing with this in a much bigger way, of course, because of what's going on in the Middle East. But at the time, it was the war in Syria that had basically stopped people from their degrees halfway through, and they were now in refugee camps. And the first refugee graduated actually in the December of my first year here, the December of 22. So I was in my first year in Dubai. So that was the innovation, if you like, that I pioneered. It wasn't all my design, and it certainly wasn't my execution. What I had to do to get this done was, for instance, introduce a completely new virtual learning environment to the business school and just to this degree. But in doing so, I got the whole university to come with me, and eventually, after another year and a half, the whole university, including Malaysia and Dubai and everybody, all came together onto this VLE. So that was very helpful. But the other amazing thing about this degree, and I cannot claim the credit for this because it was set up, as I said, 30 years before, but the university had the foresight 30 years before to provide access to it for people who didn't have an undergraduate degree, because that enabled me to go to these interrupted people in refugee camps, so that you have to do the first 3 courses. And if you do the first 3 courses and pass them, then you are matriculated and enrolled as a student at the university, because at that point you have a postgraduate certificate, and then you can be matriculated. So provided you do the first 3 and you pass those. And I knew that if I could get it into the hands of people who'd had their either no opportunity for education or had had their education interrupted, and they could show us that they can get through these 3 courses, then they were definitely worthy of supporting through to the end of the degree. And the so that was you know, an important thing, that the university allowed people who hadn't got an undergraduate degree to do it. And the second thing they did was set up the university regulations that allowed the credit to last forever. So like in America, where you, of course, have continuing credit, I think continuing credit is the future of education, which is, of course, what we're talking about here. But it was invented by Heriot-Watt back in the early 1990s for this particular degree program. And that meant that you could do some courses, stop, have a baby, move to another country, be relocated because of conflict, whatever, and then come back to it and finish. And while actually most people finish in less than 3 years, there is the tail that of people, under a very skewed distribution, but there are these few people who do stop and start and come back to it, and it makes it so accessible. So Heriot-Watt was founded in 1821 by 2 men who had 2 objectives, only 2 objectives. One was to bring education to the working classes, so they could upskill themselves and get better jobs. And secondly, they founded it as a charity. It's a fully incorporated charity, Heriot-Watt. And they wanted people to be able to access it, who wouldn't otherwise have a chance of accessing education. And we are still doing that. And so that's the basis on which I got my principal fellowship, was the educational innovation that I developed in this area. That and my work to restore Panmure House, which is the final surviving house of Adam Smith, and turning that into a centre for the creation and dissemination of knowledge.
You, in an offhand way, said, when I was doing homeschooling in Africa. So can you just indicate to me a little bit about your early education, because that sounds equally as remarkable as your later life.
So I was the child of someone who worked in what we used to call the colonial service in the United Kingdom, and then later on became the Ministry of Overseas Development, basically overseas aid. My late father was a specialist in agricultural extension, and he used to work all over the world, but mainly in Africa and mainly in Nigeria, to help people develop new irrigation systems mainly. And he was always sent to very remote places where we would typically have no running water and no electricity. And I would have my books at night read from the light attached to the car battery, this kind of thing. So really remote. And I was therefore taught at home by my mother until I was 8 years old. And then I was sent back to the UK to boarding school, which was really the only option for people working in development and aid at the time. And so yes, and then I went to boarding school from 8 to 18. So that was in the UK. So yes, that was a very interesting, another interesting lens on education. But I still believe that whether it's back to those kind of days when I was getting books mailed to us at age 7 and 8 and learning to read and everything, all the way through to now where we've got ChatGPT and we've got AI that I can say to it now, tell me the top 10 cited papers on women on boards or whatever it is I want to. I mean, it's so happy. I mean, it's like having your own personal research assistant. You have to check its work, just like you have to check a research assistant's work, but it's quicker than a research assistant. And it means that I can give my actual research assistant something much more interesting to do than go and look up references on Scopus. So I think that it doesn't matter where you are, education changes lives. And I'm passionate about changing the lives of other people. And that's what I try and bring to my teaching as well. I try and think, what can I practically do? I need to get them through their exam, sure, and their assessment, but I also need to give them skills that will help them get a job.
So when you think about reimagining higher education, which is the thematic, access and accessibility has really come through as very important. And now you've brought in technology and AI in terms of accessibility to greater corpus of information and knowledge. What are some of the other elements that would be part of your reimagining higher education? If you were given that challenge, Heather, we'd like you to.
I would definitely make it. Yes, I would definitely say that it's I would make it more bespoke. I would want to make if it's possible for us to make the journey more bespoke to individuals, because everybody learns differently. Everybody learns in a different way. Everybody wants to pursue different paths. I think the future education has got to be more bespoke, which also means more stackable. Universities are historically very inflexible. If you are studying for this major or this major or this degree or that degree, these are the prescribed things that you have to study because this is what the university approved in its university studies committee would be the elements of this program. And so actually you can't do anything else. You have to do that. And you can't add in a course on AI towards the end. America, of course, has a much more flexible system like this. That is a credit stacking system. And Australia is somewhere in between the two in terms of what it can deliver. I think that the whole world will go to a place where we can do things bespoke, where people can add in more optional things, where we have lifelong learning. So this is why I like lifelong credit. My youngest son at Oregon State, when he graduates, amazingly enough, which I honestly never thought I would see, I sent him to some summer camps when he was 16, 17 at Stanford University to learn to code in Java. And he got some credits from that, which I remember at the time having to pay an extra $100 for and thinking, why am I doing this? And when he graduates from the University of Oregon, a tiny number of his credits for that degree will come from the summer school he did when he was 17 at Stanford University. And I think that is the future, where people have a bespoke lifelong learning plan. I have, even if you consider my aborted degree at Bradford, I have done 3 different degrees in 3 different universities, plus a very lengthy professional qualification in accounting, which was 5 different exams. And what I've seen from that is that you don't just go in and go out. I recommend everybody the book written by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott called The 100-Year Life, where it points out that people born now will live to way over 100. And so you have to plan to work really until you're in your 70s and 80s. How are you, apart from making sure you have the health to do that, how else are you going to invest in your life? And this will be the future of education. It will be keeping people economically active and until they are much older than they maybe have been up till now.
I totally agree with that bespoke sort of approach, that flexible approach. But I also am very aware of, we've got a thing Australia called TEXA. They've got the Office of Students in the UK. I did some work for the qualifications accreditation group in Oman a number of years ago. There are these sort of regulators, and they don't like difference. They believe in standards slash standardization, so that it's possible to measure quality. How do you get around that? Because I think that students will have a much better experience doing what you're talking about, rather than one that satisfies the regulators.
Yeah, well, what I would absolutely want students to be able to do is to, even the things you can do at Heriot-Watt, which is that you can choose as a student to do one semester here, one semester in Malaysia, one semester in Scotland, and come back again and go all around again. And we don't impose any conditions on that. As long as you've paid your bills and you're at what we call eligible to progress, i.e. you've passed your exams, you can move. It doesn't matter if you pass your exam by 1 mark or whether you're in the top 10% of the university, you can move. And there are no preconditions. So I would like that kind of ability to port your credit around the world, just like you can port you can do that within Heriot-Watt, but I would like to see people be able to do it outside of Heriot-Watt. I do think that regulators are getting a bit closer to that. I give you an example of my own regulator here, which is the Commission for Academic Accreditation of the Ministry of Education of the UAE. They have basically said that, from now on, they will work with the QAA, who are my regulator in Scotland, to do joint inspections, and that we won't have to do an inspection for the UAE and an inspection for the UK, because when the UK inspect us, because we are a global university, they inspect us everywhere. The QAA are not inspecting Scotland. They expect to speak when they come and see us. They expect to see my students and staff here and in Malaysia. And so it is a bit of a nonsense that we end up then having to do this all over again for somebody else. So I do think that regulators are forming a club almost now of doing things together. Obviously, academic quality is something that we all have to take seriously, because employers rely on it. They Heriot-Watt is in the UK with 146 universities. Heriot-Watt is probably about somewhere, depending on research or teaching, somewhere between 23 and 30, something like that. And we're very specialist. We only do engineering and related subjects and business. That's it. Nothing else. You can't. No history of art, no French literature. And we don't have a medical school or a dental school or a veterinary school. So you're either an engineer or an architect or something in maths or computer science or an actuary, or you're something in business, and there's nothing else. And I think that people expect that. We are the single biggest producer of actuarial students. And if we fell in quality, people won't want to rely on our students, and that will just be negative for our students. So academic quality is something that you can't compromise on. That's why we have regulation. But I think the regulators could get more joined up.
So it's self-regulation that provides the basis for quality, and a set of lines in the sand about what standards need to be met.
Yes. And a bespoke thing. I mean, this is why I think AI is such an amazing addition to what we do. I think you can improve academic quality with AI. You can improve it, and you can make it more bespoke, because you can give students much more detailed feedback. You can give them a better sense of what they're doing right and wrong. So you can make, even if the journey can't be very bespoke because of the regulations, as you just said, you can make the experience more bespoke.
So you would see students at graduations a lot. You would,
Yes.
I can imagine that you're also seen around the corridors talking to students. What advice would you give students about framing their futures and really considering how they navigate a world that's unpredictable, ambiguous, and really highly uncertain? What advice would you give them?
So I always say to students, first thing is, develop your people skills, because when I greet my new students at the beginning of every academic year, I go in front of them and say, hello, I'm the provost, I'm in charge. If you see me in the corridor, in the cafe, in the queue, in the lift, please greet me, say hello. life is about relationships as well as about passing exams. So that's a very important thing. But more important than anything else, I think, is purpose. And all the academic literature shows that people who have a sense of their own purpose are able to navigate uncertainty much better, because it's their compass that when they know where they're going and where they're trying to get to, if something goes wrong along the way, they don't get put off by that. They get back on the horse, as it were, on the bike or whatever, and keep going, whatever the setback has been. And there's been, honestly, acres of forest cut down to produce the academic papers that are in the subject. So as a result, back in 2017, we took the decision that every single student in the whole university should develop their own impact statement and their definition of what their purpose is. And we teach this to them in their first year. And every single member of staff also has to have an impact statement. And obviously you can see people thinking a bit when they join the university, this is a bit new age. Why have I got to sit down and do self-reflection and decide where I'm going? But I don't see we can ask the students to do this if we don't ask the staff to do it. So all staff, professional services staff as well, are required to come and develop an impact statement. And this work was all started in our Malaysian campus by my colleague Mushtaq Al-Atabi, who is a very big a scholar of purpose-led education. And my own purpose, my own impact statement says that I am a builder of relationships, and that I use the relationships that I build to create opportunities for others, and that I want my impact to be that I help the students of today to navigate the job market of tomorrow. And so I can measure that. I can measure that impact according to what jobs are people getting, and are they are they getting the kind of jobs I want? And last year this year rather, 24, in the graduate outcome survey in the UK, we came first in Scotland and second in the whole of the UK. And obviously that's not just me. There's 3,000 members of staff helping to deliver that, but we are very focused on outcomes here, and I think my purpose is to help deliver those outcomes. So the students do all of this in their first year here as part of learning professional skills. And so my advice to all students would be, do some self-reflection, think about what you want to achieve in the world, think about how you describe yourself to others, because you're going to have to do that in job interviews. I mean, these days, I don't know when you last, Judyth, went for a job interview. For me, fortunately, it was a little while ago. It was the interview for this job. But these days, when you apply, including applying to Heriot-Watt, you have to do remote video interviews with nobody at the other end, with just the questions coming up on the screen. And we need to get students ready to talk about themselves and their aims and ambitions in life very early on, year one, not year 3 and 4, year 1. And I think that students who reflect on where they want to go, and what they want to achieve in life, and what impact they want to have in the world, and are able to articulate that, I think they will withstand the knocks and bumps and setbacks of life, both during university and afterwards.
I've got 2 more questions. What advice, given that we started with you, we're going to finish with you. What advice would you give to the younger Heather?
Well, this is the most read article about me on the internet. Did you know that? It's yes, it's called a letter. Heather McGregor writes a letter to her younger self, and I had to write a letter to myself at 17, which was published, and it is literally the most read thing I've ever done. I would say, learn professional gratitude, because everybody you come across will have an impact on your life, and we teach as part of the same course where we teach professional skills here. We also teach, and I personally teach this, professional gratitude, and the importance of saying thank you to the people that have helped you in life. And I would say to my younger self, learn that very, very early on, because it is all the thank you letters that you write in your life that will help you open the doors for the future. I got my job at Heriot-Watt because I wrote a thank you letter to somebody in 2014, and as a result, in 2016, they remembered me and invited me to apply for this job.
But it's also having grace.
Yes.
I think all too often people lack grace, and that gratitude and generosity, that's what people remember. And so that sort of memory imprint of clearly Heriot-Watt had that memory imprint of Heather. So,
Yes.
yeah, good advice. The last question, what are you reading at the moment?
I always have about 3 books on the go. So the main book I'm reading at the moment is a book called The Arabs, about the history of the region. You asked about the transition of coming here. One of the things that it's almost impossible to do here is to understand what's going on if you don't have an idea of the history of the place. And I don't just mean the UAE, I mean the whole peninsula and the countries around it, Iran, Iraq, Egypt. That this is really, you have to literally go back and start reading in about 1400 really to understand what's going on here and the history and the backgrounds of these people. Even the 1 million Emirati that I was telling you about who are here, the country was only invented in 1971, so they weren't Emiratis before then, and they created a lot of Emirati citizens at the time that were actually not from here. And so people who are Emirati now are actually from Iranian and Iraqi or Egyptian descent in many cases. So I strongly recommend that anybody who moves to anywhere immerses themselves in the literature of the area. And the book I have just finished, which is the biography of Elon Musk, which I am a voracious reader of business biographies, not just business biographies of people, but also of companies.
Mhm.
So the next book I'm going to read, because The Arabs is such a big book, I have to go in and out of it in between other books, is the book of the demise of Wirecard by Mark McCrum. So this is a German company that managed to persuade everybody that it was a big and successful company for many years, a bit like Enron, and then collapsed in a heap, mainly due to a investigation it was all exposed by the Financial Times. And I wrote a column in the Financial Times for 16 years called Mrs. Moneypenny, and that paper to me is very dear, and I was very proud of them for this investigation, and I'm looking forward to reading that book.
Heather, thank you for giving me your time this afternoon. It's been a masterclass in communication, vision, energy, and just a good person. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've enjoyed it, and I really hope that sometime our paths cross so that we can.
Well, I want to meet you in person. I would really like to meet you in person. So next time I'm in Australia, I will ask you if that's possible.
And so long as I've got a pulse, I'll make sure I meet you.
Thank you very much, Judyth.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.